You are listening to the Tricorder Transmissions, episode 83. And now, here are Craig and Jeff.
Welcome to episode 82 of the Tricorder Transmissions. We are your hosts, Jeff Hewlett.
And Craig Cohen.
And this week we are continuing our coverage of the Gold Key comics with issue number 2, The Devil's Isle of Space.
And before we get into that, though, Jeff, it is July 12th, so this time next month we will be back from the Star Trek convention in Las Vegas. And looking ahead to the 2016 convention, there's a cool little device that we could both have with us on the convention floor next year. Have you seen the Bluetooth communicator?
I have, and I'm looking forward to seeing you walking around using it.
I don't know, man. I think this is really cool. I mean, taking a phone call on the communicator, I guess, you know, you have to deal with the fact that everybody's going to hear your phone call. But I don't know. That's really cool to me that somebody has come up with a Bluetooth-enabled communicator. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, I think it would be even cooler if it had some kind of voice modification on it so you could make the person calling you sound like Kirk or sound like Spock. That would be kind of cool, too. I wouldn't want my mom talking to me over a communicator, you know?
Your mom calls and she sounds like Scotty. Yeah, it's a little pricey though. What it's retailing right now for $150.
Yeah, that's kind of steep, I think. Yeah, and there's not much about tech specs on it either. So nothing about battery life or how much it really weighs, or I mean, it doesn't look like it has a belt clip on it, but maybe it does. Yeah. All you really see is the shot on the pedestal with it closed and with it open. So I guess until we see more shots, I wonder if it's just a concept right now and they're looking to build it. That's why you can, I guess, pre-order and you can, I mean, they don't know how many to build for the first run, but I mean, it does look cool.
Yeah, it's not coming out, until January or February, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, like that. So we'll definitely keep an eye on it and look for early reviews, see what people think about it. All right. And also, Jeff, before we get into the issue, I just wanted to give a shout out to our listener, Richard Jenkinson, who put some really kind words on the Facebook page the other day about a re-listen he was doing to our season 1 wrap-up, part 1. So, Richard, thank you so much. I know you interact with us on Facebook a lot, and we definitely appreciate it. So thank you.
Richard, I had some really cool things to say about our Gold Key number 1 episode 2. So that was cool to know that some of our listeners are sticking with us through our different format change here. And, you know, as we move into covering other things besides episode commentaries, nice to have everybody along for the ride.
Oh, totally.
Are you ready to jump into Gold Key issue number 2, The Devil's Isle of Space?
Yeah, and you know what? The interesting thing here is issue 1, which we talked about last week, came out in July of 1967.
Mm-hmm. This
issue came out in March of 1968. So can you imagine the wait that kids had waiting for issue 2 to come out?
Yeah, I guess this is before it was a consistent series. I don't know really what the deal was, but I have a slight inkling of what the holdup might have been.
All right, and what's that?
Well, if you look through some of the fine print on the bottom of one of the pages, remember last time it was a Desilu comic? Well, this one actually says copyright 1968 Paramount Pictures. So maybe the changing of the studio, the selling of Desilu maybe held up some of these other... Because the funny thing is it's written by the same guy, written by Dick Wood, and the artist is Nevio Zakara again.
Yep.
So I wonder if they had these things kind of done ahead of time and maybe it got delayed because of the studio change.
We can only wonder, I guess, right?
Yeah, we can only wonder. So stardate 1903.2. A little bit of a a strange thing with the cover price on this. There were apparently some issues that were printed as 12 cents and others that were printed as 15 cents. But there's no information on what the difference between the two of those was. The cover features the publicity still of Kirk with the phaser rifle from the second pilot, and the shot of Spock on the cover is from Galileo 7.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this cover in no way really indicates what's going to happen inside, because at no point in the issue is Spock off the Enterprise.
No, exactly. So the inside cover is a real head scratcher because it's shots from Amok Time.
Yeah, with a different write-up this time. We don't get the standard modified 5-year mission writing. We get probing the mysteries of outer space. Captain James Kirk and his crew search for new worlds and life forms, but often find hidden dangers and sudden death.
And I don't think anybody dies in this except the aliens.
Yeah.
Quite interesting. So the cover blurb was prisoners on the planet of the condemned sentence Captain Kirk to share their fate. So nobody else gets called out on the cover, though, only Captain Kirk, but there's a bunch of other guys with him. But are you ready to jump into our coverage?
Yeah, and I got to say that the initial tease or stinger is a moment that doesn't really happen in the story, is it?
I mean, I guess you could kind of think it does, but I mean, they do get captured, but the whole premise of them getting captured is so the aliens can get off the asteroid, not to actually condemn Kirk to be subject to their fate.
Yeah, and well, the other interesting thing too about this teaser is it's got another time jump element to it, which is, I think, something we talked about last week, right?
Yeah, I believe it does.
Yeah, so they're big on starting right in the middle of the action, it seems like, in the comic book, which makes sense.
Yeah, you have a short amount of time to get the point across. So as we did last week, I'm going to give a quick countdown to the spoilers beginning. So if you have not read this issue and you want to read this issue before hearing us talk about it, you can do so. So we are going to start talking about the issue itself in 3, 2, 1. So to start out, the ship is on the outer fringe of Galaxy Naboo, not spelled the same way as Star Wars Naboo. It's yes. Nabu, not Naboo. The Enterprise comes upon a strange belt of glowing asteroids. Kirk, of course, orders the ship closer. This sounds a lot like last week's comic. And, of course, the ship is suddenly gripped by some turbulence and gets stuck in an electronic force field that shields the entire asteroid. So the ship is now trapped, and even with full engine power, the ship cannot break free. So they have surmised that the source of the source of the shield's power is down on the planet's surface, of course, and an away team is convened and beams down to the planet, leaving Mr. Spock in command of the Enterprise. So a couple of interesting points that happen, some terminology things that pop up here. One is Kirk orders the use of an infrared periscope.
Yes.
So that's something that we never hear about on the show. And a repeat terminology difference from the previous issue, the teleportation chamber instead of the transporter room, teleportation chamber. And this is one of the things that I think supports my earlier point of this issue being delayed due to the change in studios, because, of course, it's written by the same people. And even though they're using photographs and stills from Season 2's Amok Time, I believe that the cover may have been cobbled together after the fact. So the material itself may have been written a while back.
Oh, sure.
But was not actually issued until 1968. So page 5, I think, has a really nice illustration of the Enterprise. So if you're...
yeah, it's a half page, right?
Excellent, excellent. Looks really, really cool. So thoughts, Mr. Cohen, on this first segment, the lead-in?
The only weird thing that I got here in terms of, things that don't quite seemed Star Trek to me, at least, was, Spock really sort of dictating the actions they're going to take here, where Spock says it's possible the power source is on the planet below. And Kirk's like, hey, that's a really good thought. Let's go down there. And I really don't like to see this where Kirk is sort of seen as not being very captain-like, if you will. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it seems like when he's on the ship, he's not as captain-like. When he gets down to the asteroid, he's more in command. So it seems in the first couple of issues of the comic, he seems to default to Spock's judgment quite a bit while on board the ship, especially when coming across difficult situations.
Yeah, I guess Shatner didn't have any kind of deal in place where he was able to vet the scripts.
That's true. Good point. I definitely picked that up on that. And I think the intro to this story is very, very similar to the intro to the previous comic story. Although, I mean, this time we're caught in a force field. Prior, we were bombarded by spores in space. But either way, they're getting sort of trapped and compelled to go down to a planet in the same type of a manner. So I guess the same writer, I guess maybe he had two separate ideas, but kind of relied on a similar premise to execute the situation in both.
Yeah, but you know what? I was really thinking about this story overall, and I think that this story, and I won't get into spoiler territory for the later parts of the issue, but I think this story, with a really good pass by someone on the Star Trek writing team, I think this could have made a really, really exciting episode. And I think the setup for the episode could have been executed in a way where they didn't repeat themselves.
Agreed. I have that written down for something I was going to bring up later too, that I thought that this would have been a great episode for the original series. This could have really fit in well with season 2.
Yeah.
I think the aliens, well, with the exception of some that we're going to get into later, some of the aliens looked like they could have been executed makeup-wise.
Oh, totally.
Pretty easily. Some of them were not, but that could have been easily worked around. Mm-hmm. But definitely agree that this, much more than the prior comic, I think this one would have made a really great episode and fit into the canon perfectly. So... moving on, our next segment. So their landing party is now on the planet and discovers a group of machines that dispense food, water, and clothing. A group of bluish skinned aliens, humanoids, kind of rushes over and starts to attack them. Kirk orders the landing party to hide behind the machines while he attempts to negotiate peace with these aliens, and he is able to stave off the attack by talking. Targu, who is the leader of this alien band, attempts to explain their actions by saying they've been marooned on the planet. They had a freighter ship that crash landed there, and they've been there over a year. And had it not been for their supplies that they had on board the ship, they would have perished. Kirk, of course, promises Targu that the Enterprise will rescue all of them if they're able to find the source of the electronic field that's trapping them on the planet. Although Targu doesn't seem to know anything about the field itself, but wishes them good luck on their search. So the landing party trots off in search of this force field generating apparatus. So, Mr. Cohen, any thoughts on this segment?
It's a good setup. I mean, so far, I'm really pretty much on board with where this story is going. Again, it seems like something that would really sort of be completely in line with a setup we'd get on the show itself.
For sure. We have our first speaking alien character in the Gold Key series. It's Mr. Targu, and just like on the show, he speaks English. So aliens who crash land on asteroids, flying cargo ships, speak English too. So that's great. Also, we get a red shirt guy named Foster. He's a named red shirt.
Yeah.
And he happens to have what looks like a sheathed pistol on his belt.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting. Not necessarily a phaser. It looks like the handle of an actual, like an automatic pistol. And I think this this alien race kind of looks slightly Klingon to me, but a little bluish, of course, not brownish. But they look sort of almost like more modern Klingons, don't they?
Yeah, I totally see that.
Yeah, the high foreheads, the facial hair. Yeah, I think they kind of were a little bit ahead of their time there. but definitely could have been executed on the show, makeup-wise. So our landing party is off in search of this force field generating device, and they discover the crashed husk of Targu's ship. Kirk orders the description of the vessel radioed back to Spock on the Enterprise so they can perform some sort of analysis. So after a small wait, Spock surmises that Targu's ship is not actually a cargo ship, as Targu had originally told us. And realizing that Targu had lied, Kirk orders the crew to trust no one. So just then, the crew is approached by another alien, slightly different looking alien, but still humanoid, named Lara, who claims that Targu is a bad guy and is lying to them. So he also asks for protection, but Kirk is a little jaded here and refuses to help until he's heard the entire story from both sides. So
yeah, Lara wants to sort of cut a deal, and Kirk's like, "Hey, I'm not making deals until I hear you out."
Yeah, so the Lara tells them about the condemned. The aliens that they found on this asteroid are actually criminals. Their home planet has vanquished them to this asteroid as punishment. Once a month or so, they herd all the convicted people on the planet into these rockets, and they're fired off onto these asteroids, these glowing asteroids, with the necessary food and water that they need to survive until their sentences are carried out. Unfortunately, Targu and his band have been hiding behind the rocks and overheard the whole thing, and now they know that the jig is up. So, little terminology difference, of course. They're radioing Mr. Spock, no mention of communicators. And Spock on the ship is holding some kind of a microphone to talk back to them. So, a little bit different than the show and the way things are done on the show. And Lara, of course, the alien, looks distinctly different than Targu and his people. So I guess it leads you to believe there may be multiple species or aliens living on that planet that get sent out to these little prison asteroids. But one has to wonder, to have a punishment system like this, how many criminals do they have on that planet?
Yeah, I mean, considering they're sending out ships once a month, yeah,
Good
there's
Lord.
got to be a pretty high crime rate on this planet.
Oh, for sure. And it seems like a very... And I guess we will find out a little bit more about what happens to these humanoid aliens after they've been on these asteroids, how their punishments are carried out. But that creates a whole bunch of other questions related to this penal system. So any thoughts on this segment?
No, I do like the interaction where, Kirk's saying it seems like a pretty progressive penal system. And then, Lara's like, well, it's not progressive, it's sadistic. And he basically, spells out that they're on that asteroid awaiting execution.
Yeah, I guess, and we as readers have to now juggle in our own minds. This is very, very much like things that happen on the show. We have to juggle in our own minds who we think is telling the truth. Is it Targu or is it Lara? This kind of reminds me a lot of Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. In the way that you're kind of in that tug of war between the two opposing alien sides, and you're not sure who to believe at this point. I think this is one of the things that could have been fleshed out and done really well on the show.
Yeah, well, and the other thing you think about is what kind of crime are you committing to be condemned to death?
Exactly.
And if it's a serious crime, kind of in line with the laws we have here, maybe, you have to assume that everybody on this planet that's not from the Enterprise is a pretty deplorable person.
Yeah, you would think so. I guess we don't have a lot of information on the judicial system on that planet, rather, and what crimes warrant what types of punishment. Maybe all crimes warrant this punishment. Not like Earth, where it's a subset of crimes that warrant the death penalty. But
yeah, and again, that's a pretty intriguing idea that I think the show could have explored, as you sort of said.
Yeah, because it would have been one of those social commentary shows talking about death penalty and the pros and cons and what warrants it and what doesn't. That would have fit perfectly into the Trek wheelhouse. So moving along, Targu jumps out, knocks Lara out, and proceeds to attack the landing party again. This time, I guess Targu realizes he has to capture the landing party and force his way onto the Enterprise. In the meantime, Spock has figured out a way to break the ship free of the force field. But before the landing party can be safely beamed back to the Enterprise, Targu captures them all. And we see something play out here that's been played out on the show a couple of times, though it's one of those inconsistent things where they can't be beamed up in a wide dispersal because some of the aliens are close by and would get caught in the transporter and be brought up to the ship as well. So they are unable to beam the landing party back as of yet. Kirk, of course, becomes the Kirk we know and love and plays hardball with Targu. And Spock discovers that the asteroid will explode in 24 hours. So this is the end of part 1 of the story.
So we see for the first time in the series, I guess, Lieutenant Uhura, right?
Yeah, she's unnamed.
And she's wearing gold.
Yes, she's wearing a gold shirt, has no name, but she is called Lieutenant. Mm-hmm. So I guess we are supposed to understand that is Uhura. It looks very Uhura-like.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. I think she only shows up in one panel throughout the entire book.
Yeah.
But nice to see. And also on, that's page 14, panel 1, by the way, if anybody's following along. Page 13, panel 3, we see Scotty, but I think his shirt is gold again, just in this particular panel, though, because later he is in a red shirt. So a little inconsistency there with the inking.
And I have a problem here with the whole not wanting to beam some unwanted people up to the ship. I think with the Enterprise's security detail, anybody they beam up, they could deal with.
Absolutely.
If this was going to be a show that went to script for an actual episode, this would be a story point that would be worked out. There would be some kind of problem with the transporter, or they'd have to find a more creative way to not be able to beam up the crew.
Agreed. This is one where they could have used one of those technology disabling, like maybe the force field that they were stuck in meddled with the transporter, or they couldn't beam through it. When they beamed down initially, they were inside the force field, but once Spock broke free, that may have been a side effect of being outside the shield, as they couldn't beam anybody through it. So that could have easily been written around. Hey, we could do this. we could turn these into actual episodes. But no, I agree with you completely. We've seen on the show hostile aliens or hostile people being beamed up onto the ship and immediately detained. So I think that's something that could have been worked around for sure.
Yeah, especially if you think about the confusion that being beamed up unexpectedly would cause with the aliens.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if they'd never been beamed anywhere before.
Yeah.
They would be very unfamiliar with the process, and you're instantaneously in a different surrounding. They could have had the security detail just standing there waiting for them to appear. So moving on into part 2.
Yeah, which has its own separate title. Did we have a separate title in the first issue?
No, I don't believe that we did. It was just part 2.
Yeah, here we get The Secret of Execution Asteroid.
Yeah, that is really strange. So definitely don't recall there being a separate title for the first issue. We'll have to keep an eye on that for the subsequent ones. So Targu turns out to be a sort of dictator, taking control of the criminals around him. So Targu explains how they survived so long. So they wait for more rockets to appear in the sky and then chase them down and seize their supplies when they land. Targu's demanding to be taken to the Enterprise to escape with a small detachment of his most trusted henchmen. Of course, Spock refuses to deal with Targu out of loyalty to Kirk, although Spock does seem to think that this may be an acceptable bargain, which is a little bit of a strange Spock moment. Kirk refuses to allow Targu and his men to beam up, though, and in true Kirk fashion, it gives Spock command of the Enterprise and orders him to leave before the asteroid explodes. So we see the tried and true Kirk sacrificing himself to save the ship. So page 21, panel 1 shows a radio device that looks more like a tricorder than a communicator. Yeah, definitely. And I think the great Spock character moment really harkening back to the show where he's refusing to deal with Targu because he only answers to Captain Kirk. Excellent. So thoughts on segment 5, Craig?
Yeah, I think this kind of makes Kirk look a little thick in the sense that you have Spock saying, basically saying that the trade, even if it's in code, it seems acceptable, knowing that they can just sort of, surprise them when they beam up. For me, I think, again, if you're equating this to how it would play out on the show, you think that would almost be a coded exchange between Kirk and Spock, and here it makes Kirk look really, really silly.
Yeah, this could have been a Queen to Queen's level 4 type moment, right? This could
exactly.
Been, yeah, and I think Spock is way ahead of Kirk in this instance. I think Spock he has this all planned out of how they could just deal with these handful of aliens once they come up and just to get Kirk out of it. But, I kind of like the fact that at least Kirk is still Kirk-like here a little more than maybe he has been in the prior episode. And especially at the beginning of this one where he's kind of defaulting to Spock's judgment. Right. I kind of like that he's hardball Kirk and he's doing things that we know of him from our experience with the show. So that's kind of a little bit of a endearing moment for me. So moving on, segment 6, Spock decides that he can ignore Kirk's order because he was technically given command of the Enterprise before Kirk issued the order. So that's pretty Spock-like.
Oh, yeah.
And Spock devises a plan, orders Scotty to begin collecting metal parts from some damage control portion of the ship for some hasty overnight construction project that we don't know. We're not privy to what the plan is, so even the readers are kept in the dark. But notice that Scotty is now in a red shirt.
Yes.
But he doesn't look like Scotty.
No.
At all. And I think during this segment, Spock has another one of those very strange exclamations.
Oh, yeah.
That you love to point out.
Yeah, so, what is it?
Shades of Pluto.
Yes.
Yeah, this strange writing choices and a very un-Spock-like moment. So we have a very, very Spock-like moment followed by a very un-Spock-like moment. So it looks like they still don't have the characters completely gelled in the comic. All right, moving on to segment 7. Back on the planet below, the landing party awaits their fate. Suddenly, they see a rocket streak across the sky, and that sends Targu and his band of henchmen running to plunder for their last big feast before the asteroid explodes. And as they approach to attack, the Trojan horse opens and the Enterprise raiding crew pounces out, led by Mr. Scott, and quickly makes short work of Targu and his men. The landing party is rescued just in the nick of time. So can you imagine how this would have played out on a screen?
Yeah, well, I think this is probably the section of the episode that would have needed the most work, because if you think about it, Targu and his men are basically ruling things here. So would they really be in a situation where they'd be desperate for food?
That's a good call. I kind of suspended that thought in my head by, Targu exclaims that this could be a last grand feast. So maybe he was just thinking we'll cook everything.
Yeah.
Like the power in the fridge is out. We got to cook everything or it's going to go bad. Going to go to waste. So let's just pull everything out and let's do it up.
Yeah. And the only other thing here is as soon as the distraction is created, they could beam Kirk and his crew to safety, and then pretty much beam up Scotty and his team.
Good call.
You wouldn't really need to play this ambush out as far as they do.
Yeah, the firefight wouldn't need to happen. The risk of loss of life, but fortunately, none of the raiding crew loses their life. I think they were far technologically superior.
Yeah.
To what the weaponry that Targu and his people had. So page 26, panel 4, clearly shows a tricorder.
Yes.
Being used for communications. That's the first real straight-on shot we've seen of a drawn tricorder in the
being
comic.
Called a radio, though.
Yes, being called a radio. So again, terminology strangely not present. So no mention of phasers, communicators, or tricorders. Although we clearly see the image of a tricorder. So that makes me scratch my head. Obviously, the artist had a reference material to know what a tricorder looked like, but did not know the writer did not know what they were called.
Yeah, unless these scripts predated by a lot, the artist might have had, more information to work from.
Yeah, good call. Good call. So we have a little bit of a closeout segment here back aboard the Enterprise to round out the issue. They still need to escape before the asteroid explodes. Kirk admonishes Spock, which is kind of cool. That's very much like the show. Kirk is mad because Spock deliberately disobeyed his order, but Spock explains the joke and says that, hey, listen, you gave me command prior to giving me the order, so I was actually in command, so I can do whatever I want.
Yes.
Fortunately, due to the heroics of Spock, the ship is able to get away just as the asteroid explodes. So the crew is safe for another day and is on to their next adventure. Some strange terminology once again. Spock calls for rockets on full to escape. No mention of impulse or warp drive. Rockets. So that's interesting. And one thing I thought was really interesting too was that on page 27, panel 4, Spock refers to Kirk as Jim.
Yeah, but then he also says he uses the word enjoy, which is very un-Spock-like.
That is true. So it's so strange how he keeps flipping back and forth between real Spock and comic Spock. Another really strange choice of words. Kirk calls the situation a squeeze play. Let's see. And there's a very, very un-Spock-like moment on page 28, panel 1, with Spock joking about not giving command back.
Yes.
Right, to Kirk. He'll hold on to it. He's enjoying it so much. So thoughts on the resolution of the issue, Craig?
It's kind of grim. Even if they were known criminals, and we don't really get an indication of how severe their crimes were. But to think of all these characters that we've seen over the course of this issue being blown up, I'm not entirely sure how that would play on the show. I'd almost think that if this was made into a real episode, they wouldn't have needed to escape before it blew up. They probably leave maybe a couple hours before it happens, so we're not really left thinking that they're going to explode.
Interesting point. Yeah, the comic does seem to have more of a grim, dark ending to it than we would have normally seen on the show. So, yeah, good point there. I can definitely say I like this issue far better than the first one.
Oh, agreed. Are we done, though, or are we going to talk about the keys of knowledge?
I was going to hold that off until we were done doing our quasi-essential non-canon vote. I'll go out on the limb again and say that I don't think this is essential non-canon reading, although it is very entertaining. And, like we were saying earlier, from the perspective of Star Trek stories that were created but were not used as television shows, I think this is interesting because it really seems to fit, even though it was written by someone who never wrote for the show. I think it's interesting to think that what this could have been had they actually submitted this as an actual Trek episode.
Yeah, I agree. I could almost see this issue being the outline that was submitted, and then, with notes from Kuhn and Roddenberry, could really develop into, a really well done, well executed episode of the show.
Absolutely. One thing that really stands out to me is that if you're looking for material to turn into either fan films or a new original series, I think these Gold Key comics may actually be worthwhile, at least in some respects, for story ideas.
Yeah.
So I'm surprised no one has ever done that. And a strange change between this issue and the first one is that the last 2 pages of this comic appear to be some sort of educational material about swordfish and a brachiosaurus.
Yes.
So clearly these comics were aimed at children with educational material at the end, although the comic book subject matter seems to be very grim for child's reading.
Yeah, I guess maybe that this addition at the end was a way to distract from the grimness of the ending. It's like, hey, let's talk about swordfishes and dinosaurs.
Yeah, so okay, we'll round it out with some good knowledge, or maybe they just came up 2 pages short.
Yeah, that's probably the more likely scenario.
Yeah. So that about wraps it up for Gold Key Comics issue number 2. Thanks, of course, for being along with us for this ride. Looking at our download numbers between last week's show and the prior weeks, it looks like everybody has been staying along. So thank you to all of our regular listeners for being there with us for this, and we really enjoy having you, and hopefully more of you will make your way to the Facebook page at the facebook.com/Tricorder Transmissions, or follow us on Twitter at TTT_pod. And Craig, anything to say as we close out?
No, it's just, like I said, it's very, or like you said, it's very cool to hear that everybody's been coming along for the ride with us. It's very much appreciated to know that you haven't jettisoned your pod.
Yes, thankfully we have not been jettisoned. Nice. So hopefully we will see you all again next week for issue number 3 of the Gold Key Comics. And stay tuned. On this Wednesday coming up is the final episode in the Year 1 series of What Are Little Songs Made Of? So keep an eye out for that. Also, sometime in the very near future, we'll be debuting the new album art for the next phase, the next series of What Are Little Songs Made Of? So look out on Facebook for that and Twitter for that. So that'll be pretty cool. And all right, thanks. We'll see you next week.